Who would have ever thought food is controversial in 2024? We talk about that and much more on this episode of The Crude Truth.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
This episode is brought to you by LFS Chemistry. We are committed to being good stewards of the environment. We are providing the tools so you can be too. NAPE Expo, where deals happen. Air Compressor Solutions. When everything is on the line, Air Compressor Solutions is the dependable choice to keep commercial business powered up. Sandstone Group. Exec Crew. Elevate your network, elevate your knowledge. Texas Star Alliance. Pecos Country Operating. Fueling our future.
Well, hello again, and thank you as always for tuning in to another episode of The Crude Truth. Today, as we continue into this wonderful year, 2024, we talk about something that really, who would have ever thought is controversial, and that is food. Now, we do dive into more, but when I say that, what does that really mean? Why and how is food controversial? Well, today, to answer that question and to also explain it, I brought on somebody that is just literally, and I've said this on the show before, literally blazing a trail. Literally, she is just fighting for the farmers, for the ranchers of America, and for every single person that watches this to eat. I brought on somebody that is not only an advocate or a lobbyist, but also is just sharing her thoughts and ideas with the young minds of today as a professor. And also, she is 2024's Cowgirl Magazine's 30 Under 30. My guest today is Sara Falen Tate. Sara, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming in, and welcome to the studio, and just welcome to Dallas. For everybody out there that is like, who's Sara? Because first of all, I think it's really maybe for just my followers, because you have such a huge following going on. But, for everybody out there, who is Sara?
Well, I will tell you a little bit about my background. I am a 6th generation Wyoming ranch kid. I live north of Cheyenne, Wyoming. My family has a cow-calf operation that my husband and I also still work on. My family has been in Wyoming for 6 generations, but also on my dad's side of the family, he also has multiple generations of ranching. And that is really where we get our roots from. And you hear sayings like, tough cowboys pull it up by the bootstraps. And that's really how I grew up and how my family has always lived our lives.
Well, thank you so much for even coming into the studio, and welcome to Dallas. Being here in Texas, we like to think that we have the Cowboys in our pre-production meeting. There's really not that much difference other than the weather's a little bit colder up there.
Yes, very much so.
And, I want to highlight why you're in town. And if you don't mind, I did kind of mention it there in your introduction. Why are you here in town?
I'm here for Cowgirl Magazine's 30 Under 30. Yes. It's an award that Cowgirl Magazine hands out to 30 women under the age of 30 who are making a difference and trying to impact and better Western industries.
That is just so awesome that you, one, you definitely deserve that award for all that you've been doing. But I mean, that's a national recognition, and Cowgirl Magazine is no joke. So I mean, what you're up to, and like I said in my cheesy trailer, is like you're blazing a trail right now, Sara. I mean, what the heck is going on?
Well, I started off really being interested in how federal laws and to some extent state laws impact agriculture and natural resources, because growing up in a ranching background, you see all the time the battles that farmers and ranchers have to fight just to be able to work to put food on the table for consumers across the United States and across the rest of the world. So seeing all of those problems firsthand and then wanting to be able to do something about it. And that's what took me to the University of Wyoming for undergraduate school. I got degrees in agriculture communication and environment natural resources. And then I decided to take it a step further and go to law school.
Yeah. And with your law school background, you have actually been fighting at a federal level for some of these things, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I've taken groups of farmers back to Washington, D.C. to actually talk to our representatives and our senators about some of the issues that we're having. I think that one of the problems that we have is we have a lot of really great lobbyists and a lot of really great people out in Washington, D.C. trying to educate senators and representatives about our issues. But I think that there's a different aspect that comes in, a different perspective when you have farmers and ranchers themselves come out and say, hey, this is how this law is shutting me down. This is how I am going out of business. And, representative, this is what you can do to keep your constituents in business, feeding the rest of the nation.
And in my teaser, I got to say, I did take it from you, is that, who would have ever thought that our food would be so controversial? I mean, as you know, I'm in the oil and gas industry, and they try to, they talk about methane with us all the time. That's something that you guys are getting, methane. I mean, they're telling y'all that we have too many cows and they're doing too much methane. I mean, what do you say to things like that when you hear those kind of things?
Well, I saw something kind of funny recently, and, one of the people that we give a hard time all the time is Bill Gates. He's a guy who's constantly talking about how methane and how we need to reduce the number of cattle in the United States and in the world, and we should be eating like insect-based protein and things like that. And so I saw a thing that said, Bill Gates can lock himself in a garage with a car, and I'll lock myself in the garage with a cow, and then we'll discuss the details in the morning. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, because I tell you what, it seems like there's always people in big cities, smog-filled cities, who are saying that we, the ranchers, who our whole business is premised on taking care of the environment. If we destroy our environment, we go out of business. And so we wouldn't be doing things that are bad for the environment, because it quite literally puts us out of business. And so it's so funny to me that someone from a big city will turn around and say that we're the ones causing problems in the environment.
It is something that I find very, and again, that's why I think the oil and gas industry and farming and ranching gets along so much, because it's like we're there, we do a job, then we make it look as if we weren't there, minus a pump jack going on. You guys, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a professional farmer or a rancher, but y'all move around so that the ground can recultivate, maybe is a correct word. So it's like y'all are making sure that the grass and the soil is all getting replenished with vitamins and nutrients. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The first thing ranchers will tell you is if you graze pasture down too far, the grass won't grow back. And then you don't have the pasture for next year. Yeah. And so it's really important that as we raise cattle, we do move them to different pastures. Then the manure from the cattle helps fertilize the ground. Yeah. And also as they are grazing, it actually helps the grass absorb more carbon from the atmosphere. And that carbon gets stored in the roots of the grasslands and actually helps sequester carbon.
Wow. I actually didn't know that last part at all. I mean, and so it's like you guys are literally making greener pastures, not only for the cattle to eat, but also for us to breathe clean. And I see those memes all the time where it's like you got somebody from a big city and they take a beautiful green pasture and then they put, solar panels and some windmills on and go, much better. And it's like, no, it's not, is it?
It's really not. And, when you think about it, something like, solar panels, they take up so much surface area, and a pasture keeps the sunlight from hitting the grass, which actually damages the soil. Should the solar panels be removed, it's actually going to take a lot longer for that pasture to be able to come back, because sunlight is a really important part of environmental health.
Really? They'll hurt the ground down below?
Yeah, when it's not having the sun, and you think about when rain falls, it slides off, it's hitting the ground differently. It's just not as good for pasture land as letting it have access to the sun and to the rain and to how things are naturally.
Really? No, and I ask you that because you see, or at least, you see pictures of like goats or the small animals that are shorter than cows eating and grazing underneath solar panels all the time. Like, oh, look, we can do both. And I'm like, can you really? And it sounds like you really can't sustain that for long term.
I would think not. I'm not an expert in that. I won't pretend to be an expert, and I think for smaller animals, goats and sheep, that could be a good way to utilize pastures in more than one way. But the problem is there's not a huge market for goat meat or sheep meat. People prefer the premium products, which as a rancher, I will always say is beef.
Yes.
And it's hard to have cattle in an area like that. And not to mention, animals can be very destructive. So I imagine that there then comes to be a lot more maintenance and cleanup around those panels.
I could only imagine. But speaking of cleanup, I want to talk, because you've been to Washington, D.C., and what was it that really just got you going? It was a video that went viral that you just did. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. I've done a few videos that have hit pretty hard. Most recently, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, came out with a regulation that was going to allow individuals and government entities, including foreign governments, to either lease or control federal lands to be put in a natural asset company, which means that those lands that are put in a natural asset company cannot be used for hardly anything. They can be used for renewable energy. They can be used for regenerative agriculture, but can't be used for anything else. And then those assets can be traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, and wow.
So it was going to allow foreign governments to control our natural resources.
And weren't there some like big groups that were behind trying to get that to get passed, if I'm correct? And then also, I find that so interesting that you mentioned how they get those credits, because in the oil and gas industry right now, they have these things called carbon credits. Yeah. And it almost sounds like it's the same thing. It's in a way, it's like, oh, hey, we're not growing something on this, so we'll give you a credit for it. Holy cow.
Honestly, it was going to work really, really similarly to a carbon credit program, which, quite frankly, in my opinion, the way carbon credits work is that if you have a big company and they've got a lot of money, they say, well, we're giving money to someone else so we can do whatever that we want to the environment.
Yes.
It's not really an offset. You're just paying for your own environmental damage.
Exactly. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. But it's like, so basically, like when you're net zero, it doesn't mean you're actually changing any, like if you had smog coming out of your smokestacks at your factory, you're not stopping that. You're just buying these cheesy credits over here that keep this area still clean and clear, and so I know, but also you are a professor. I mean, first of all, I can't believe that. And in today's world, I want to throw this at you because in my teaser and in introducing you, you are sharing with Gen Z in class. Okay. I am definitely the one before that. I'm definitely older than that. And I'm working on my master's degree right now. And I, as an older person, see this indoctrination that is going on at the college level. So I think, and I hope that's okay to say, because I know we didn't talk about this, I think what you're doing by just allowing people to have an open mind and you're not forcing anything is just awesome. And they're only continuing to add more classes to you for next semester. That's just awesome.
That's been, teaching has been such a fun experience for me. And I actually really struggled at first because when I was in college, I had my fair share of obviously very biased professors. And I felt like I was punished for having different opinions. And so I really wanted to make sure that I didn't have any students that felt that way, should they have differing opinions than my own. And when you teach about law and policy, naturally there's just a lot of opinions involved in it. And at first I was trying to figure out how I could keep my opinions completely to myself and then thinking about it, it would take a very quick Google search for any of my students to know exactly where I stood on any issue because of the nature of the other jobs that I have, which require me to put my opinions on the internet for everybody to see.
Well, and that's not to cut or jump in, but I mean, that was what made you had a one viral statement that you just made on your phone one day, and that thing took you, Sarah, to where you are right now. So yes, I think it's so cool that they said, so keep going. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, and so what I ended up deciding to do is I was going to be very upfront with them about where I stand on issues. But when I'm talking about an issue, especially one that I have very strong opinions on, which quite frankly is most issues, I give both sides of the issue, and then I give the students, it's a very discussion-based class. I ask my students what they think. Now, here's what the law says. How do you think it should be enforced? How do you think it applies to your own agriculture operation? A lot of my students want to go back into production agriculture. Okay. And so how does this apply to agriculture? How does this apply specifically to your operation? And then at the end, I say, this is what I think about it.
Okay.
I also do activities where I will hand out a case, and I'll make them all read the case and divide them up in half completely randomly and say, you argue for this side, you argue for this side. And there's always students who have to argue in favor of something they don't believe. But I think it's so important to be able to think about opposing arguments and actually be able to articulate and anticipate what they're going to say. Yeah. And that really only helps your own personal arguments.
Yeah. If you're not a lawyer, I don't know. I mean, if people didn't know you were a lawyer, they definitely know now. And I love how you're making people think outside the box, or at least look at the other side. You're almost like sneaking in a way for them to make them look at the other side. Like, say, hey, you're just going to be on this side over here. Go figure it out. And do you just give me A's? Like, I have one professor who's like, yo, I'll get an A for this. I kid you not. I'm like, well, then why? What? Yeah.
No, I don't just hand out A's. This is only my second semester teaching. Last semester, I have my students write a legal research paper. They have to pick one agriculture issue, and they have to argue in favor or against something. And they have to make several arguments, and then they have to anticipate at least one opposing argument. And for undergrad students, it's a pretty intense paper.
I was about to say, that's the part near a case study on their own. As I'm getting my master, I'm like, holy cow, that sounds like something I have to do now with certain things.
It's very intense. And I really wanted to encourage students to work at it, and understanding that it's a tough paper, and I grade things pretty hard because I think writing skills are very important. I told them that for their rough draft, the grade is going to be really low. I said, I am not expecting anybody to get a very good grade on this, but if you really work at it for your final paper, I will make your rough draft grade match whatever it is you got on your final. And I think they were all very grateful, because I think the average grade on the rough draft was like a 60%.
Oh man.
But then they worked at it really hard, and my office is always open. Come in, I'll help you wherever you need it. But, I want you to do it, and I want you to learn, and I want to make sure that you can do this
the right
awesome
way. Well, speaking of learning, what is production agriculture? I don't know. What is that?
So it is growing crops or raising animals. It's people who raise food for everyone else.
Oh, I feel like an idiot. Okay. Well, and we talk about raising food and how, these people out there like, and I guess we use the name Bill Gates. He's not a sponsor of the show or anything like that. But they're literally out there trying to tell you guys, again, and we already touched on it, how it is that you guys are doing bad things to the nature, to the world. And I just, again, find that so horrible. That they're doing that. But also, speaking of horrible, here in Texas, we just had some fires up in the Panhandle. And I mean, what is that going to, how do you think that'll affect, I'll throw a curveball at you. How do you think that'll affect the beef market? Like, do you have any insight on that?
Well, so the beef market is really interesting because farmers and ranchers, we are price takers, not price makers. And so when food and when the price of food changes, that is mostly due to packing. It's due to grocery stores. Farmers and ranchers don't get to create the prices. And so just because we have less product doesn't necessarily mean that now you have to pay more to us specifically. You maybe have to pay more because of, packers, or because the grocery store is charging more because they have less of the product. But very rarely does that actually change as far as what we get in our pockets.
Wow. I did not know that at all. That's crazy. That's very different. And then I know that you shared that you guys had a little fire incident up in y'all's neck of the woods here recently as well, correct?
We did. Northwest of Cheyenne, where we ranch, we have some ground that's just kind of straight west of Cheyenne, and then some ground that's north of Cheyenne. And there was a fire, and, thankfully for us, the wind changed, and so it kind of just missed us. But we drove up there in side-by-sides, and we were watching the fire just with some fence wow. And, seeing if the wind changed again, are we going to have to go run our cattle out? Or it burnt up, I think, tens of thousands of acres. Not anything like what has been happening in the Panhandle, but anytime you have a fire that's burning down houses or burning pasture land, it's always devastating to the whole community.
Yes, and let's talk about that, because let's talk about how ranching affects an entire community. Can we I totally get something I didn't even want to, because it affects everything that y'all do, and especially and I'm just going to say small town America. I mean, is that correct?
Oh, it does, especially when you get into really small towns where the majority of workers are farmers or ranchers. Yeah. When we have regulations or we have, laws that are shutting people down, or bad weather, hailstorms that are damaging crops, that is going to damage how much the farmer gets, because they don't have anything to sell. Even though they don't get to control the price of what it is they're selling, right. They don't have anything to sell. And so then that turns around, they can't give money to schools, they can't give money to local fire departments, go shopping at the local stores. It is a huge chain reaction.
And I wanted to ask that because it's the same thing in the oil and gas industry. You go out to a small town America, and you see oil wells out there, and you got somebody that comes in and starts reworking those wells or drilling new wells. Next thing you know, the little local cafe's busy again, the gas station's busy again, the little supply shop is busy again. And it's like, I feel like they are really, and I'm going to say this, it's almost like they're really focusing on rural America and trying to make it more and more harder for rural America than they are, the big cities in life. And we have people that have never even stepped foot on a ranch, almost making decisions for you guys out there. And that's why I think you and what you're doing with your Wild West Advocacy is so important.
That is, everything you just said is completely accurate. I think that the reason that they work so hard to control rural America versus cities is you have less people, easier to make regulations, easier to enforce regulations on a smaller amount of people than on large amounts of people. So just practically, I think that's where that sits. But I think the biggest issue is we have such a lack of education in agricultural issues. People like to talk about the word privilege, and privilege in the United States is it being so easy for you to get food that you don't even have to know where it comes from.
Yeah.
And most people don't. They just go to the grocery store and they buy their vegetables and they buy their packages of meat and have no idea and no consideration about all of the things that had to happen to get those products to the grocery store shelves. And so I really think that is a huge blessing and a huge privilege to live in the United States of America, where you don't even have to worry about where your food comes from.
Wow. You're absolutely right. I mean, how many kids think that the energy comes from the electrical outlet? Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's like we are so, I think just in America alone, we're like above 75% of the rest of the world, like every American in some form or fashion, because we all do have access most of the time to running water, to go to the store and at least buy something. And I think there's just so much being lost in the fact that we have actually men and women out there that are raising these cows, these packages of meat that you get, or the hamburger from McDonald's that you get. You got people growing the wheat. At least we hope it isn't a McDonald's hamburger or wheat.
Right.
But growing the wheat for the buns and doing all that. But no, nobody knows about that anymore. And nobody's talking to them about it. I think I've got a 2-year-old, and I've been watching the old movie, and maybe if anybody out there, called McClintock. Mm-hmm. It's an old movie, and it's actually a little political. And
John Wayne, right?
Yes, ma'am, John Wayne. And he loves it right now because there's cows and there's horses, I think. That's it. But it's like you watch the scene, and he goes, 15 cents all the way to Kansas City or something like that, talk about a pound on a hoof. And they're just so excited. And he goes, that's money in the bank, boss. And we think about that in the oil and gas industry. It's like if the oil's in the tanks, like it's money in the banks. Mm-hmm. But we don't do that anymore. And I'm not trying to say, I think I don't want to compare somebody like, I was not going to bring up the show, but Kevin Costner and John Wayne. There's a big difference between those people. And to where the people out there and the Western is gone. It's like I still buy beef from a friend of mine. He has about 100 acres. Night and day difference between what I buy at the store and what I get from him. The quality of meat is so much better when you buy it actually from a rancher right there, to where, because I feel like America also doesn't get the privilege to taste what you guys really have grown, even in a cow. So I just want to kind of, get off and random there because, people don't understand the old days and because we don't share it anymore, and we're forgetting, there it is, we're forgetting history of the world and how it is that things are truly made or built. They don't want to see how the sausage is made anymore.
That is 100% accurate. And that's part of the reason why I started sharing on social media. Is I talk about a lot of legal issues and how they impact agriculture, and that's what I decided to do with my law degree instead of be a practicing attorney, is, share about these issues. But I also share what we do on our ranch. Yeah. And, we have calves in the spring, and you have to go and give them, vaccinations, keep them from getting sick. You have to give them ear tags so we can identify them. And I put those things on the internet, and sometimes I get some really adverse comments and perspectives because people don't understand why it is that we're doing that. And we do everything on the ranch for a reason. We're not just, punching holes in the calves' ears just because it's fun. Yeah. We try to explain that, I've got 5 ear piercings. And it's exactly the same thing that we do to the calves. And I'm pretty sure I survived all 5 of mine. So I think the calf is going to survive just 1 in his ear.
Well, and come on. They talk about that. It's like we're not branding them anymore most of the time. So it's like, that's more humane anyway.
Well, we actually a lot of states require branding. So
it shows I'm throwing so many things at you. Thank you. I did not know that. Okay, really?
Yeah, in a lot of states, branding is required. One of those states is Wyoming, so we brand all of our cattle. And you actually have to get a brand inspection before you put those cattle on a truck to send them somewhere else, or to send them to the packing plant, or to the auction or whatever.
I did not know that.
You do have to do that. And one of the things is people think that branding is so cruel, but you think about what are welding gloves made out of? Cowhide. And that is the toughest material that we use for handling hot metal. Sure, the calves bawl for a second, but it's really not that bad for them. They have such thick hides that, if that was something that was actually damaging to their health, we wouldn't do it.
Oh my gosh. Well, Sarah, I feel like I got an education today. And I do want to say this, and I'm glad that you are teaching because, and telling your story to people, because we need more people fighting for us in Washington, D.C. And by us, I mean us Americans that understand that things don't come just out of the sky. And, so you have groups of people that are out there in Washington, D.C. fighting. And I'm glad you're doing that because you understand it. You live it every day, because the people in Washington, D.C., they don't understand anymore. They are out of touch. Truly, I think a lot of them, not all of them are, not all of them, but a lot of them really just don't understand what we do in Middle America anymore. And the bad part is Middle America only continues to get smaller.
That is true. The rate at which we are losing agricultural land is astounding. And I don't want to try to repeat the statistic because I'm sure that I'll get it wrong. But every time I see the statistic, how many acres of ag land are lost every year, I am just shocked. And the problem is that people think, oh, good, this land is going into, preservation. That's going to be healthier for it. It's like, well, folks, you still got to get your food from somewhere, and it might as well be from this country where we can benefit our own economy. And also we have really high standards on animal welfare, on health and safety. You want your food to come from here. You don't want it to come from somewhere else.
That is so true. I mean, because of the standards, man, there's so many core similarities. It's like between ranch and the oil and gas industry. I get why there's so many people that do both. And I just, you're absolutely right. I didn't even think about how from, we need to buy American meat, grown here in America. I mean, is that not terrible that we have to say that?
It's completely crazy to me that people think that, oh, well, this land is, going back into nature, as if cattle aren't part of nature anyway. But, going back into nature. And then they're like, I'm going to go buy a package of ground beef. Well, it's from Brazil, that's it. And that's the reality of it. And I wish that more people understood that, folks, you got to eat. That part is not going away anytime soon. And I don't care how many buildings in New York City have rooftop gardens. You will not be able to take care of the United States like American agriculture today can.
And that's the crude truth right there. Sara, how can people fight with you, and get behind what you are up to and everything else that you're doing? How can people get in contact with you?
I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok is my biggest platform, LinkedIn, how we became connected.
Yes.
All of my handles are Sara Falen, the various ways of Sara Falen, but it's all my name, and I can be found that way. I can also be found in the directory at the University of Wyoming.
And I want to leave. I'm going to ask one more question. Are there any things going on in Washington that concern you right now that are affecting farmers and ranchers? I probably should have asked that earlier in the show.
How much time do we have?
Oh, my gosh. I love it. Whoa.
Some of the things, I would say one of the biggest concerns right now is the Biden administration's 30 by 30 initiative. What that is the Biden administration's executive order, which is an attempt to take 30% of our land and water and put it back in its natural state by the year 2030. When they started that meant that the federal government had to obtain an additional 440 million acres of land because national parks don't count. The only things that count are wilderness areas and wild and scenic rivers. And so they are taking that land, either private land that private individuals are willing to sell to the federal government, or federal lands out in the West. Most of the land is federally owned. Nevada is 90% owned by the federal government, and taking land that we use for production agriculture and putting it back in its natural state, whatever that means. They haven't really defined what that actually means. But just taking those lands out of production.
Holy cow, that's huge.
It is huge.
They are literally slowly slowly starving us to death.
It's absolutely a land grab. And while they say, no, there's still plenty of food, like, well, we're going to have to get it from other countries because you need land to grow food.
Yeah. Well, Sara, again, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. And if we're coming in, and one more time, congratulations for Cowgirl Magazine's 30 Under 30. I hope you enjoy your time here in Texas. And I want to have you come back on again in the future. So I just cannot wait. Thank you so much. And to all our listeners out there, I hope y'all learned something. I definitely threw way more questions at her today than I was planning to because I learned so much. And we'll see you again on another episode of The Crude Truth.
Again, The Crude Truth would like to thank today's sponsors: LFS Chemistry, NAPE Expo, Air Compressor Solutions, Sandstone Group, Exec Crew, Texas Star Alliance, Pecos Country Operating, and Real News Communication Network.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.